Well, let me talk about natural gas in the heat market of the future. I'm from Zukunft Erdgas, future natural gas. Of course, I cannot look ahead into the future. I don't know what it will look like. But of course, there are different scenarios regarding our assumptions regarding the heating market of the future. Let me present a study to you. It's this one, modernization timelines for one-family dwellings. We did a simulation calculation. For that matter, Germany is not only the country of thinkers and poets, but also a country of engineers, of inventors, of mechanical engineering. That is undisputed. And climate protection goals to be reached on behalf of the federal government is relatively simple if there are no financial restrictions. And this is our very approach which we have chosen. We said the heat market should be considered for one-family dwellings and, on the other hand, for multi-family dwellings. That's a second study which I'll discuss at the end. And the result for the one-family dwellings I want to present to you now. Mr. Conradi has already mentioned the relevant climate protection goal, relevant for our markets, to be reached by 2050 when we want to be climate neutral, and we want to lower our primary energy consumption, and we want to become more efficient altogether. So we want to reduce CO2 reduction and greenhouse gas reduction by 85 to 90%. The heat market stands for 37% of CO2 reduction in final consumption and 37% CO2 emission and 90% of the entire energy consumption. When the energy discussion came up, we had a discussion on electric power only, but not based on use, but based on generation. And after Fukushima, that was a discussion. The change in energy was only discussed under the label of the leave from nuclear power. And now the climate protection CO2 reduction as the goal of the change in energy, even before Fukushima, which should get more to the focus of politics. And the heat market with its goals, especially these major goals, 37% CO2 reduction, which means considerable leverage to reach these goals. Now, what did we do in our study? The one-family dwellings and the semi-detached houses, 15 million of them in Germany, and those taking decisions on their own, another 12.5 million, because we also have rented out one-family dwellings, which we have clustered. The Statistical Federal Office has done this study, and from left to right, you can see the situation. To the left, that's the lowest income category, 30% of all one-family dwellings, with a net household income up to 2,000 euro. Then the largest group, 40% in the middle, that's a net income up to 3,000 euro. And then the highest income strata up to 3,800. In mean terms, this is 3,200. And then to the very right, those with 4,300 euro in mean terms. Well, maybe you understand the term mean. This is not the precise average value in order to level out, straighten out one-off peaks. So in the middle and to the right, those with a high net income, those are the ones which can afford the change in the energy policy. We have to watch those to the left-hand side, having a house with a net income of up to 2,000 euro. Hence, if the washing machine goes bust, you are happy to afford a new one. You need not talk about energy saving with those people. There you have to argue in social capability terms. The databases which we have selected is from the Institute Housing and Environment. From the left to the right, you see the age brackets of the buildings, and then you see the owner groups starting from low incomes, those in bright up to the darker ones, distributed over the individual decades. Of course, you can see that those in the newest buildings are the ones who have most of the money, which is a truism that was to be expected, because those who have money also build new buildings. Hence, from the middle to the left, we need to consider rehabilitation, and that's where we have to start from with our leverage. Now, what did we do? We considered 264 cases of modernization based on the findings of the Statistical Institute. We have 8 different types of heating. Not each one fits each and every building. If I have a protected building, you wouldn't have underfloor heating. And this leads us to the 80 starting conditions, which we compared to the income groups. And that means 264 modernization plans, and you apply, you consider the envelope of the building and the technical facilities. Now let me show how the individual income brackets behave in that regard. To the left-hand side until 2010, then to 2030, then to 2050. Those are the targets for 2030, 2050. And based on the individual years, you see what can be modernized and when. In the chart, let me jump back quickly. Down there at the bottom, you can see the monthly net income, and at the very bottom, we assumed a start-up capital for energy-based modernization. And in the low-income bracket, so this is smaller, with 3,500 euro as compared to those with a larger income with 10,000 euro. We further assumed that given the energy-based modernization, you have lower heating costs, and half of that can be invested in energy-based modernization. That is our basic calculation, which we assumed. And this takes you to the following result, namely, in the smaller income bracket, the one-family dwelling, an exemplary building from 58 to 1968, when we started from a bad energy level, buildings quickly erected after the war from the 50s to the 70s, and then the heat protection provisions came to bear as of the 80s, and then there were many buildings which had to be modernized all of a sudden. We have such buildings more than 2,000 times, with families with a gas boiler, rehabilitating with condensing boilers, and up to 2030 they could save 20% of energy. Then bio-natural gas mix would be added, the ceiling of the basement would be insulated, then new solar thermal station would also be built in. Then in sum total there would be a CO2 reduction of 32% by such a family. We need to know that 80% is the goal in regenerative terms, or considering greenhouse gas to be CO2 neutral, 80 to 95%. We don't achieve this, but we do not have considered subsidization or leaps in technology. Should there be such technology leaps, and we talk about a period of 35 years, which are more low cost, we could achieve even more. The second income bracket, that looks already much better. There's a one-family dwelling, also dating back to the period from 58 to 68, with an oil low-temperature boiler, which is substituted by a condensing burner, and you could insulate, and they would get new windows, bio-natural gas mixture would be there, and in sum total you would already achieve 63% CO2 reduction, which is 40% of the one-family dwellings we have, with a target of 80% and without subsidization and with very conservative assumptions. And the entire savings generated could be reinvested to the tune of 50%, which is good value. And the income bracket with the highest capital, of course, lives in the most recent buildings and the newest ones, built in from 2002 to 2009, which is the best in terms of energy. And with a startup capital, a fuel cell would pay as of 2023, which may sound paradoxical because 130% CO2 reduction mean that not only one's own building, which produces relatively little CO2, would be put in neutral condition, and you could even, urge out carbon-based power from the grid. And as mentioned by Mr. Conradi, by 2050, the situation will be much better. And so this would still be the same fuel cell, but the savings would be lower. Of course, it would have the same CO2 saving, but the general mix in the grid is better, and the urged out power would be lower, that's to say. And this income bracket would surpass the target of 80% and reach CO2 neutrality. Now, what about this example? What does the heating market look like in 2030 and then in 2050? This is an example. It's not a projection of ours. It's a simulation-based calculation. And in this simulation-based calculation, if you say, let's subsidize one technology, or technology makes a quantum leap and the fuel cell is enhanced in its degree of efficiency. And if you place subsidization in a targeted way, the picture might look totally different. But the technologies with low investments would substitute the bread and butter business of today, hence condensing burners and solar thermal energies, which would still be used in one-family dwellings to a major extent. And then we also consider this for 2050. We see 53% of condensing burners and solar thermal energy, hence a broad mass would trust in what we already built in nowadays. And considering the current figures, in the market of new buildings, we have a penetration of 50% by natural gas technologies. At this fair, of course, we see many new beautiful innovations, small power-generating devices, heat pumps, and so on and so forth. And these technical leaps and developments which we see are not yet even considered there. Now, what about the energy sources? What kind of change would take place until 2050? Well, this has a focus. We assume CO2 optimization, hence we substitute as much CO2 as possible, as a consequence of which fuel will be the big loser, because if CO2 is to be substituted, this means that in doing so, especially in CH4, we have a lot of hydrogen with the option to save a lot of CO2 if we substitute fuel. Hence, the gas technologies would increase, oil would rapidly decrease, but we still have a little bit of oil because we also have rural regions without gas grids and where local and district heat doesn't really pay, and we would have a stable, stagnating, slightly increasing part with pellets or logs. Firing. So what about the sum total throughout all the income brackets to achieve 62% primary energy savings and the respective CO2 savings with a socially compatible approach, with a low starting capital without subsidization? And at the moment, well, tomorrow the market incentive program will be another issue at the press conference. GW and BAFA will be put on a permanent foundation, as we've heard. Hence, we may expect subsidization to do something on the income side for the people who really rely on such things for proper calculation. And that is already a very good approach, very good story. And if you consider the timeline of 35 years up to 2050, we really have an option also regarding gas-type technologies. What are the core results? Well, the financing capability of the owners and the different owner groups need to be considered. Measures and openness to technology need to be taken seriously. Hence, no direct subsidization of technology, but rather openness to technology, leaving it to competitors, and the best will win. Be it the air heat pump or our friends from IWO or us with gas technologies, competition will decide, and then the low-cost systems, also for the owners. And the CO2 as a guideline, well, the change in energy was also considered from the viewpoint of power generation with little CO2 savings. We have higher CO2 emissions from power generation because our coal-based power stations work well, and we also have a small portion of subsidized photovoltaic contribution. So if CO2 shall be in the focus, we shouldn't make the same mistake anymore as in power generation. And of course, this is not only done for the one-family dwellings, but on the E-world. In February, we also did it for multi-family dwellings, where less CO2 potential can be tapped, because in specific terms, the energy consumption in multi-family dwellings is lower. But of course, there are institutional investors and housing communities, and that is a totally different market as compared to private owners. There we also made a comparison. To the left-hand side, you see the one-family dwellings. To the right-hand side, the market of multi-family dwellings, without going into too much detail. So condensing burners is a price-worthy solution, given the low investments needed for this purpose, so that would end the winner. Interesting enough, at the top, 1 million fuel cells, and given the power savings, small units, fuel cell, power generating heating, in combination with fuel cells with a high degree of efficiency, which can support power generation, is really on the advance. Another point on that, especially for multi-family dwellings, according to our study, 49% of the modernized buildings, bio, natural gas, and mixture would be used. Hence, you could also save CO2 without investing additionally in insulation technology. Without touching upon all the details, this is certainly the story which we want to take along. If we want to invest comparatively little and also in a socially compatible way in modernization, and then we need natural gas-based solutions. To the right-hand bottom corner, district heat. In our study, we considered the development scenarios for district heat, meaning that district heat will also become much more regenerative in the various phases. Then, of course, local heat, district heat, especially in cities, in large conurbation areas, where this makes sense, instead of considering quarterly-based solutions. The heating structure by 2050, pursuant to housing units, the green ring marks represents where we are standing. The entire heating requirement will decrease considerably, but in socially compatible terms, there would be mainly gas-based energy contribution. Well, that's it from my side. Let me thank for your attention, and now I'm open for your questions. I've brought 2 studies with me, these 2. I brought a few more copies, which you may take along. If you need more, please pass by our stand in Hall 9. When you're entering, you see Zukunft Erdgas, the green label, and I brought one more, which is a recent one, the compass is describing the behavior of natural gas technology in the new NF. One finding for us was, in these terms, that 64% of the newly constructed buildings in 2013 built already better than will be prescribed by the NF 2016, based on the KfW figures. And then two-thirds already stay below the limit values, and with our natural gas technologies, we then stand good chances also in construction of new buildings to be successful. And the most recent figures I came to know amount to almost 50%. And in the sold equipment, we reach 70% based on natural gas. So you are in a stable position as a market leader, and we assume that this will remain a sovereign, reliable factor